Today's guest speaker has a very accomplished and let's just say varied list of credentials. B.S. in Christian Education, Samford University Master of Divinity, Duke Divinity School Public Relations Director, and most recently, Public Relations Director at American Atheists. Teresa McBain is also the first female graduate of the Clergy Project, a private, invitation-only, safe house community of current and former ministers who no longer hold the supernatural beliefs of their religious traditions. David Silverman, president of the American Atheists, said of Ms. McBain, "She is a shining example of the fact that atheists who feel trapped in the preacherhood can escape the lying life and get honest employment. There is no life after death, but there is life after church." We are honored she has joined us here today to share her journey from faith to freedom. Won't you please welcome Teresa McBain.
Move this up a bit. I think I'm a little taller than was expected. Yeah, I'm good. Now, I must admit, when Bruce was talking about we don't take up money every month as some groups do, I come out of a group where we do it every week. So you guys are really behind the times on this one. Yeah. You'd have a lot of money if you did that, you know. Just take a hat, pass it around, give them some kind of an emotional appeal. You got it. Money. Let me set my timer so I don't keep you for several hours. All right. You know, I'm going to breathe into this. I'm used to having a puff filter on mine because I like to breathe. I don't know if you like to breathe or not. How many of you like to breathe? You do? Okay. So you'll forgive me if my breathing goes during the show, right? It's important to me too. If I happen to hit the floor, anybody know CPR? Do you have the little breathing mask? That's my big question, though. Some of you, I don't want the breath resuscitation. No, anyway, we'll go on with that. That's asking a little bit too much, isn't it? There's a gentleman in 1962 by the name of No. I know this. I got this. I wrote it. I know it. Yeah. I lived it. It's my life. I can tell it. In 1962, a gentleman by the name of Thomas Kuhn coined a phrase that you've probably heard. It's called a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is when a radical change takes place from one way of thinking to another. At least that's how we're going to use it for our purposes. This radical move, and if you've been religious, you understand that a move away from your faith into either deism, agnosticism, or even atheism is radical, definitely radical. If you were as deeply as entrenched as I was a pastor for crying out loud, then a paradigm shift is probably a very light term that you could use to describe my journey. A paradigm shift is a revolution. It is something that's transformational. It is a metamorphosis in the same way that this little caterpillar that's running around eating leaves all day, hanging out, having fun with his buddy caterpillars, decides he wants to take a nap, winds up wrapped up in this cocoon, and then wakes up, and lo and behold, the caterpillar life is gone, and the new butter life has come, and there are wings, and there comes freedom with that. It's the same way that this paradigm shift has worked in my life. And maybe it worked the same way in your life as well. What once was no longer is, but something better has come. Sorry, I know that sounded a little preachery, but it's good. It's good stuff, okay? Write it down, remember it. It's good stuff. The thing about a paradigm shift, however, is it doesn't just happen. It is driven by agents of change. And that's what I'm going to share with you. What is it that brought me from the place of being a Christian, growing up Baptist, growing up very deeply religious and entrenched, to becoming a minister, to standing in front of you now as an atheist, as a secular humanist, working for probably the most hated atheist organization, at least in the United States. You heard what my boss said about me, so you know exactly what I'm saying is true. So how did that occur? What are those agents of change? Well, let me tell you how it all began. Probably the same way it began for you. There was a man, and he met a woman, and they fell in love, and then, voila, there's a baby. And she was a cute little baby. And she was fuzzy, had lots of hair. And anyway, we'll move on from that. You can see me here at 3 years old and standing with my just older brother, Tim. It's an Easter Sunday in northeast Alabama. It's nice and chilly, hence the cute little white tights. At this age, this 3-year-old little girl loved church, loved God so much, I couldn't wait. It wasn't Saturday morning cartoons that really sparked my interest. It was church. I can remember being this age, 3 years old, and every night after my dad got home, the treat was after dinner, I got to crawl up in his lap and take that big, giant family Bible. Did any of you guys have one of those at your house? That big, gigantic family Bible with all the cool pictures in the middle? He would sit up there and he would read to me from that Bible at 3 years old. I mean, can you imagine that? And nobody forced me to do it. That was just my reality. My dad was a pastor. I was a preacher's kid. I wasn't one of those that went wild. You know, my husband used to tell me that when he first met me and heard that I was a preacher's kid, he went, yes. He found out different pretty quick. I had a little Bible, Little Red Gideon's Bible, actually, Little Red Gideon's Bible. One Sunday evening after our church service, the Gideons came, and if you're not familiar with them, they're an organization that raises money in order to put Bibles in hotel rooms. They used to give them to students at schools and churches. They can't do that anymore. But they also send them to service members who are serving overseas in war zones or just in other bases and such. So this Gideon comes and he represents his organization in order to get money from our church to raise some funds so that he can put out more of these little Bibles. Well, after the service was over, he called every one of us little young'uns up there. And at this point, I'm about 6 or 7. I had started school. And he gives me this little Bible. And let me just say, pardon the pun, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. This was the greatest thing that I can remember getting because it meant that I had my own Bible. I had my own sacred text, Word of God, sent from heaven above just for me. I took this thing with me everywhere I went. Now, I know this may be hard for you to believe, and I'm not using those preachery exaggerations that preachers like to do. I took this thing with me to school. And if I happen to know that you did not go to church, or I was a Baptist, if you went to the Lutheran church or the Catholic church, oh my goodness, the Catholic church. If I knew that about you, I tried everything I could to find time so that I could sit next to you and read to you and try to convert you so that you would come to church with me. Now, remember, this is a little girl, not very big. I look back at pictures and go, wow, how in the world was that possible? You know, I have bought in this much, and most other little girls are interested in playing Barbies. Not me. I was interested in going with my dad on Monday nights to outreach and visitation. And what that was when the preacher went and visited people in the hospital and the nursing homes and people that had visited the church to give them more information, or, again, like I did, visit people that he knew didn't go to church but needed to hear the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ and be saved. Can I get a hallelujah? Hallelujah. Sorry, Alabama comes out every now and then. This is where I was. Why do I say this so much? Oops, I'm giving you too much in advance, aren't I? This is the little girl that lived. This is my life that early on. In 3rd grade, I was absolutely so far in, there wasn't even a thought in my mind that I could possibly be wrong, that any of this could be wrong. I mean, it was truth. It was absolute truth. And I didn't even think about questioning it. Now, how many of you grew up in religious traditions? Any? Okay, so you understand what I'm talking about, right? You've been there at some point. Now, maybe you realized it. I had a guy tell me, I figured this thing out when I was 9 years old. Why did it take you 44 years? Well, I don't know. I'm just not that smart, I guess. I don't know. Actually, I think it's one of these things. It's just because I was so far into this whole thing, and I wanted to love God. I mean, it was never an effort for me. It was just the way I was. It was just the way things were. My Bible study continued on. I mean, I never stopped. When most people, again, were out playing, they were out hanging with friends or doing whatever, I was studying my Bible. My dad had I don't know if you'll believe this or not, but again, it's not a preacher exaggeration, it's true. My dad had his old theological textbooks laying around, and I would read them. This is the definition of insanity to me now. 12 years old, 13 years old, reading systematic theology. Who does that? I mean, who does that? It's no wonder I became a preacher. But one day I can remember about that age, about 13, that as I was studying the New Testament, I was studying the books of Corinthians, I realized that there was something funny. Something just didn't add up. In the book of 1 Corinthians, Paul takes about 4 chapters. Now, this is going to be your Bible lesson for the day. It's Sunday morning. I have to put it in here somewhere. So just pay attention for a few minutes, and it'll make sense after I'm finished, okay? Can you bear with me for that long? There's about 4 chapters where Paul talks about how church services and worship are supposed to take place. This is the authoritative scriptures on what's supposed to happen if you go to church and how it's supposed to take place. So within these 4 chapters, I've read them before, I've studied them before, I'm pretty much sure exactly what they're going to say. Actually, I know for certain what they're going to say. And so I'm reading one that you've probably heard before. Paul writes, and he talks about the role of women in church. And he says pretty plainly, women, keep what? Keep quiet. Keep silent. Don't speak. Keep your mouth shut. If you've got a question, you go home and ask your husband later, which is what you should do. Well, on that day, I noticed that just a couple chapters before, there was a verse that said women, when they pray or prophesy in church, which, by the way, both of those require you that you talk, which I can't do, seems to be this morning. When you pray or prophesy in church with your head uncovered, you dishonor your head. I was immediately confused. Immediately, I couldn't figure it out because here's this book that I had trusted, that I had devoted my life to and felt that it was absolutely 100% perfect, not an error anywhere, anyway, anyhow. And it's saying 2 different things. It's saying, keep your mouth shut. Go home and ask your husband. Then it turns around and says, okay, you can talk in church, but only if you wear a hat. So which one is it? You ever wondered why women wore a hat in church back a few years ago? That's another story. So I was very, very confused. And, of course, I go to my dad. It's my dad. I'm daddy's girl. I'm going to grow up and be just like my dad. My dad teaches me everything, and he's the authority. And I lay my case out before him just like I did to you guys. And my dad sits there for a minute. He thinks. This is the late 70s. He has his little beard. And he looks at me and he says, Teresa, are you confused? Well, duh, of course I'm confused. That's why I came to my dad. Of course, I'd never say that to him. Trust me. Never talk disrespectfully to my dad. And he said, well, the Bible says that God is not the author of confusion and that his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So when these things come into your mind, it's because you can't understand the ways of God, and they have to be taken by faith. So you need to go and pray that God would increase your faith. Here's what I heard. Doubt equals lack of faith equals sin. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you're a religious devotee, it doesn't have to be Christ or Christian or anything, the number one thing you want is to please that deity. The number one thing you don't want is to displease them, and that is called sin, right? Sin is the bad, bad thing. I lived my entire life guilty every single day because, I just wasn't perfect. I don't know how many of you came here thinking that you would find somebody finally who was perfect, but it's not me, unfortunately. I'm not the big show. I'm just somebody like you, but I took away from this encounter with my dad that doubt equals lack of faith equals sin. This means that anytime I doubted, I had to immediately start praying. I had to immediately throw it away or try to tuck it away somewhere else in my brain because that was going to be sin. And I didn't want to be a sinner. I wanted to be a true, mature follower of God, a follower of Jesus Christ. So if you wonder how I could stay trapped for 44 years, maybe it was because I wasn't so smart. I don't know. But my theory is it's this encounter right here. I shut down the natural questioning that exists within every one of us because it was sinful. Don't question, just believe. Take it on faith. A lot of years pass. It's hard to kind of put a whole life story into about 30 minutes. So let's just jump ahead a lot of years. I've already gone to college. I've already gone to divinity school. I'm in divinity school, actually. And I know for certain that God has called me and that He called me long time ago to be a pastor like my dad. Now, there was a lot I had to work through because, I was raised Baptist, and if you know anything about Baptists, they follow the first part of Paul's teaching, women keep silent in church, and they ignore the other part that says, if you pray or prophesy, wear a hat. Well, I chose to follow the wearing the hat part of the verse because I felt that that's what God had called me to do, that I was supposed to be someone who taught the truth, who spoke the truth, who cared for people, who helped them through the life cycles, who supported people. I just knew that that's who I was supposed to be. Well, it's kind of hard for women in religious circles. How many of you who are women, men, don't raise your hand. How many of you who are women and came out of a religious tradition understand that there are difficulties and limits put on you as a woman? Yeah. How many of you experienced it firsthand? Now, most churches, especially the more fundamentalist denominations, teach that you could be a teacher of children, that you could lead a women's group, that you could definitely put on potlucks and work in the kitchen and wash the dishes, but leave the rest of that to the men folks, right? That's how I was raised, and that's what I believed. So it took me some years to move past that into a place to where I felt that I could, according to what the Bible said, I could be a minister. I could be a pastor. And how did I do that? Well, I just ignored the parts that said I couldn't. Okay? It's called cherry picking. You've probably heard that term before. So what I did at first was I went to the prison, I went to the nursing home. For 4 years, I went to a women's facility at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday morning and preached for an hour and a half to these women who were incarcerated. On most Sundays, you would find me going from anywhere from 3 to 5 different nursing homes, just one right after another in the town where we lived, preaching, praying for, loving on these senior citizens. And I felt like I was finally getting a chance to begin to spread my wings. But I knew that there was still more to it, that I had to find a way, that I had to find an outlet because I knew that God had called me. There was a lady that I met who was a part of an addictions and recovery group that I was working with. And she was going through the Methodist Church to become an ordained minister within the Methodist Church, which does accept women as pastors. And she suggested to me that I start looking into Methodism. Now, initially, my old Baptist upbringing popped up and was like, no, Methodists are evil. They don't baptize by dunking. They sprinkle, and they do it to little babies. Well, I quickly got over that because they were offering me a shot to move into ministry. And she gave me some books by their founder, John Wesley, who, by the way, he was a religious man, and he did found a denomination, but he was pretty radical. If you've ever read anything about him, he was hated in his own right, so much so that they kicked him out of all the churches. He couldn't preach in the churches, so he went in the streets, and they kicked him out of the streets. And he actually went one time to preach to a group of people in a pasture, and the church folks found out about it, and they turned a bull loose on him. So in a sense, he wasn't a humanist or an atheist, but he suffered a little bit, I guess, of what we have suffered. But when I studied John Wesley, some of the things that he was teaching really started to hit home for me. One of them was this statement. Wesley said, though we may not all think alike, may we not all love alike. I had never, ever heard anyone in a religious setting or anyone with authority, and here John Wesley has authority, he founded Methodism, He said I didn't have to think like everybody else. That was pretty liberating for me, because what had I done for all those years leading up to that point? Not thought. Took everything on faith. Just believed it because the Bible said it. So here is this person saying, though we may not all think alike, may we not all love alike. The second thing he said was this statement: in the essentials, unity; in the non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity. For me, this meant that as long as I hold on and cherish the very core tenets of Christianity, I mean, just in a very broad stroke sense, then I'm free. I have the liberty to do anything else I want to think about all those things that I had stuffed away for so many years, to do research, to read books, to talk to other people. I mean, to really expand my knowledge. And at this point, I felt like this liberty to do those things was going to make me such a great pastor. It was going to make me that much more of a mature Christian, because finally I'd be able to answer the questions that all people have. The questions that most pastors don't even want to be asked. Well, I was going to learn, and I was going to discover, and I was going to find those answers, and I was going to be able to help people, to be able to really help them, because I'd finally have answers for them. Well, that really just led me to more questions, actually. My sister told me when I came out to her, my next to the oldest sister, she was very upset, and she told me, she said, "Teresa, you have always thought way too much, and that's your problem." Well, I agree with her. I have always thought way too much. So the questions really started to flood after I had this permission and this liberty to start thinking about all the things I had ignored for so long and just taken by faith. Of course, the first one was the Bible. That one had been building up for years and years and years and years and years, starting way back with that 13-year-old girl who couldn't understand why wearing a hat made the difference about talking in church. So I started to really dig into it, and I went old school on this one, guys. I have to tell you, even though I'm really a techie person, I wanted to dig in the books, and I wanted to write it out. So I had notebook after notebook after notebook of inconsistencies and contradictions and places where the Bible scientifically didn't match up with what we know as science. You know, some of those, like the earth is still flat, those kinds of things. Historically, even the Bible itself saying one thing, and then just like that passage in Corinthians, turn around and saying something completely different. And I didn't have answers at that point, but I was just writing them out, trying to find the answers, trying to deal with those questions. And it wasn't too long. I mean, considering this had been going on in the back of my brain for a bunch of years, a lot more years than I'd like to say, I had to come to the conclusion that the Bible was really just a book of myths and fables and stories. That was a hard step for me, because I had put my trust in this book ever since I had been given that little bitty red New Testament. This was my entire life. So I can remember when I slid slowly into this place of understanding that the Bible no longer was the source and authority and contained all the answers for my life. Was pretty difficult. But at that same time, as I'm going through and finding these things out about the Bible, naturally, logically, you would think that the theory of hell, the theology of hell, would come up. And it did. And even though I was reading the Bible and understanding that it was just a book of myths and fables, and understanding that the Jews in the Old Testament had no concept of hell, that they simply believed in a place of the dead, where a lot of Jews, people that I talked to, said, you just die and that's it. You're in the dirt. Okay, I can agree with that one. But I never really came around and took hold of this whole concept. It's kind of funny to me, and I don't know if you experience this when you're growing up and you're raised in a religious circumstance, how you can gloss over the most horrible realities that are presented in the Bible. For example, those of you who are religious, again, let's do a quiz. How many of you had a Noah's Ark playset? Anybody have one? Now, why in the world would you give your child a playset that's about destroying the entire planet and saving 8 people, right? Why in the world would you do that? You know, that'd be like giving them today some type of, no, I won't even say that, because that's just absolutely unthinkable. But why would you give them a Noah's Ark playset? we gloss over those things and we don't deal with them. I mean, we feel pity. I can remember going to talk to people knowing in my mind that the reason I had to go talk to them was because if they didn't accept Jesus, they were going to die and they were going to burn in hell. Did I ever logically think what those words meant? Burn? A person burning? That's what came to me as I was driving in my car thinking way too much. My children growing up, they're 25 and 22 now, and my oldest son, let's just say he was a little bit mischievous. He liked to get in trouble, and he especially in school liked to get into fights. Now, he tells me it's always because the kids were saying things about his mama, but I honestly think he just liked to fight. Well, one particular day, I got a call that said, Miss McBain, we need to talk to you about your son. And they had that tone, this is like the 50th time we've had to do this. You need to do something about your child. And I was honestly very, very frustrated, very upset, and even angry with my son. Any of you ever been angry with your child because they've just misbehaved and misbehaved and misbehaved? Please raise your hand, everyone who's a parent. You're lying if you don't. And that's sin, and sin is wrong. Even when he had driven me to the point to where I thought I was going to pull my hair out, I never considered taking him out to the playground at the school, dousing him with gasoline, and setting him on fire as an example to the other students about what would happen to them if they misbehaved. Now, if I didn't think of that, and I'm this crazy, not quite so intelligent pastor who is struggling with the faith, still believing that there's a God above that loves us. If I wouldn't do that, and I didn't create the universe, then why in the world would God do that? And so in that moment, I had to just toss it. I had to tell myself that if that type of being exists somewhere, then I can't have anything to do with it. Because torture, that type of torture especially, which, by the way, goes on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, which is a long time, I couldn't have anything to do with it at all. Pretty quickly after that, I started thinking again about religion and religions and looked into them. I joined an interfaith pastors group and got to know and to meet some people face to face. There was a Muslim imam that was a part of the group. There was, I don't know what they call their clergy, but it was a representative from the Baha'i faith, a Jewish rabbi. I mean, just pretty much any of the religious groups that were in Tallahassee, these people came and we had lunch together and we talked. We put on an interfaith, like a fair or festival where there's food and you can come and see different representations of their faith, talk to them, get to know people. The more I did that, the more I realized we had more in common than we had different. And so I started thinking again, and came to the conclusion that God is out there somewhere, and all these religions exist to meet the needs of people really based upon their culture, based upon where they were born and how they were raised. I happen to be a Christian because I was born in the South in America during a time when Christianity is pretty popular. Other people were raised in the Middle East, or they were raised in India, and they followed the traditions and they followed the religions of their parents. So at this point, I guess you would say, I don't know if I was a deist because I still believed that Christ was my path and Christianity was my path. I don't know what you'd call me. I think at one point I called myself a Christian agnostic. But either way, this phase only lasted, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then I had to deal with something that's very, very difficult to deal with. And no person in the religious community, none, has ever been able to give any type of good, solid answer that you can buy into. And that's the issue of theodicy. How many know what theodicy means? Okay, so you guys well, anyway. Theodicy, my joke is, and they're going to know that I'm joking, theodicy is not the idiocy of theology, although there is a point that could be made for that. Theodicy is the issue and the problem of evil. The problem of why do bad things happen to good people. This is the issues that pastors don't want to deal with especially. They don't want to go to a parent's house whose child has been abducted or murdered or abused by a priest or a school teacher or someone, and they look you in the eye and say, how could God let this happen to me? I'm a good person. I go to church. I pay my tithe. I work in the community. How could this have happened to me? This is the question about when something like Hurricane Sandy comes and it hits our area and people die for no fault of their own. Even though Pat Robertson tries to blame it on the atheists every time, it's not our fault. I promise we didn't do it. Matter of fact, many of us went and helped. Some of the people that are staff at American Atheists went and joined, believe it or not, with a Catholic group because they were the ones who were taking the lead and taking the initiative in the area where we wanted to go and help. Now, you guys know all about that. You're humanists. I just heard your announcements. You know all about humanity reaching out to help humanity. This issue of theodicy can't be answered that way through religious groups because they're teaching that there is this divine benevolent being, this divine God who sent a Messiah of sorts, and every religious group, every major religious group has this same theme running through it, to redeem us. That prayer is the answer, that through prayer you can find relief, you can find answers, you can find solution, you can find healings, you can find miracles, yet it only happens just a tiny, 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 tiny bit of the time. So how do you answer that? That's what theodicy is all about. And the more I looked into it and the more I read about it, the more I read Christian authors trying to explain it, because I haven't gotten out of that world just yet. I still haven't moved away from reading Christian authors. There are no answers. And I started reading some ancient literature. This fellow named Epicurus wrote something, and the day I read it was the day I realized that this is really the answer to theodicy. Epicurus wrote, "Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent, all-powerful. Is God able but not willing? Then he is malevolent." And I must admit, I choked on that word the first time I saw it. Is God both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Good question. He came as close as any have ever come to explaining this issue of theodicy. This is where I was. This is my bubble. This is where I live. This is my Christian bubble. And the things that exist within that bubble with me were Christian books, were the Bible, were Christian service activities, were Christian friends, were Christian meetings, church, Christian music, Christian mission activities. Even the addictions and recovery ministry that I was involved in was a Christian addictions and recovery ministry known as Celebrate Recovery. So I had been insulated for all these years. Nothing could break through my bubble, because if it did, then it would destroy my faith. Question: if your faith is strong and that's what you have, how can you destroy it? Anyway, that's a question for another day as well. At this point, I started to do the unthinkable. I started to read books that were not Christian books. I searched on the internet and I found Bart Ehrman. Bart was pretty good because Bart dealt in theological terms. He dealt with biblical things, and those were the things that I knew. I mean, that was my wheelhouse. I knew what he was talking about. And really, I didn't find a lot of answers within Bart's books. Sorry, Bart, if you're listening to this. But I found confirmation of the things that I was already discovering. And that's what I needed to know, that I wasn't some nutcase way out there thinking these crazy thoughts, losing my mind, going through a midlife crisis, maybe needing to be hospitalized or at the very least medicated. I was actually on track. And his work and his research and his field really confirmed those things for me. Next, I read Richard Carrier's book on proving history and his work on dealing with the historicity of Christ. Again, things I never even thought about, never even dawned on me to question them. And yet, I found with his work and with Bart's work those theological issues and those theological questions that I needed to deal with first. Because remember, I'm coming out of being a clergy person, or I didn't know that at the time. Even at this moment, I didn't know what was happening. I just thought I was going to be stronger, more mature Christian, better able to serve the flock that I had been entrusted with. But I found more of the confirmations of the things that I was dealing with. I realized I had been grown up and educated in the South. And if Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution had ever been mentioned, I honestly can't remember it. I can remember in school being taught about creation and reading the Bible story. I mean, this was in the 70s, so there weren't regulations and rules on those types of things and what schools could teach. Or at least if there were, my school didn't follow it. I don't know. So I reread a lot of the works of Darwin. I pulled up Carl Sagan. I knew just from school, I guess, I don't know, that Sagan was a famous person who dealt with these matters of faith and non-belief. And so I read several of his books, especially A Demon-Haunted World. That's a very, very good one if you haven't read it. I looked into this guy who looks like Santa Claus, Breaking the Spell by Dan Dennett. Another book. That one was kind of a tough book to read because you just have to really get into the mind of what he's trying to say. And for me at this point, I guess I was beginning to think that there was something changing inside of me that was really drastic. You know, that radical change from one way of thinking to another, but I wasn't willing to admit it. So Daniel Dennett's book was really tough on me. It led me to the place where I knew that something was happening. So one night late, I went on the internet and I Googled. I had to find somebody that had been where I was at. And I Googled clergy who feel that they're losing their faith. And Dan Barker came up, and his book, Godless, popped up on the screen, which I downloaded on my Kindle and literally stayed up reading it. It only took me about an hour or two to finish the book. And I knew at that moment that I had found somebody who was a kindred spirit, who had walked where I was walking and had made it out on the other side. So I called the contact information at the end for Freedom from Religion Foundation. And the next morning, I got a phone call from Dan Barker and literally talked to him for about 2 hours. He shared his story with me. I shared my story with him. I just felt like I had found an instant friend. And that's when I found out about the Clergy Project. The Clergy Project was just formed at that point. There were 52 people who were a part of this project. Some of them were current pastors who were still in the ministry like I was at that time, and they were trying to deal with all this stuff and then trying to find a way out. And some were former pastors. So it wasn't totally 52 that were still in the pulpit. But this was an online support group, a safe house, as was shared just a minute ago, where we would log on, find the encouragement and support of fellow pastors, work on trying to figure out a way to get out of all of it safely so that our families weren't destroyed, so that the finances, I mean, there's so many considerations. I have a friend who is still inside the pulpit who's, he's an atheist, he's a humanist, and his wife has a disease. I won't share too much because I don't want to give him away at all. But if he leaves, and he's at that age, where you're kind of, if you leave one career, it may be hard to get another career, may be hard to get another job, life insurance, pensions, all those kinds of things come into play. But the biggest one for him is his wife has this terrible, uncurable disease, and if he walks away, then she has a pre-existing condition, and they can't get insurance on her. So he is trapped. And I talk to him about once a week, and, I mean, he is absolutely the most miserable creature that I have ever known because he's so torn. Now, these are the kinds of stories that a lot of people don't care to hear, and not within the free thought community. I have to say that the free thought community has been absolutely wonderful to me and to my family. But one of the things that continually come up from the Christian community, from the religious community is you're frauds, you're hypocrites, you're liars. You should come out immediately. Who cares what happens to your family? Well, that's not very compassionate, in my opinion. Maybe they're right, but I seriously doubt it. The Clergy Project became my lifeline, and I logged in several times a day, talked to people, became friends with them. None of us knew our real names. I mean, I used a fake name. My friend, his name is very original. It's Adam. Pretty cool, huh, Adam? We became these fast friends and started trying to work to share with one another, to talk somebody off the ledge when they've just had enough and they want to go to their district superintendent or their chairman of the board and just punch them in the nose, those kind of things. The Clergy Project for all of us was something that was and continues to be very special. When the Clergy Project started, March of last year, 52 people were a part of that project. Now there are almost 400, and that doesn't count the applications that are waiting for people like me to call them and vet them. Probably, if you add up all the applications, well over 500, maybe close to 6. So there's a lot of people that are waiting that have stories that are very similar to my story. Trapped, feeling alone, feeling left out there just dangling, waiting for the other shoe to drop and somebody to find out and their world comes crashing down around them. For me, the moment that I shifted into the open was at the American Atheist Convention in Washington, D.C., in Bethesda this past year. I left my church March the 18th. That was my last Sunday. I knew I would never go back, that I could not go back, that I was at the end of my rope. I'd worked an extra job somewhat secretly for about 4 months. Since I found out I was no longer a believer, I took an extra job and had worked. Only a few people knew that I was putting money away and working. They had no idea why, but now they know. I came out. I had an opportunity. It's really interesting, a lot of details, but suffice to say, I got an opportunity to go up on stage and share my story as Lynn, which was the name I was using, not my real name. And I got up there in front of all those people, and I had my story in front of me, and I was ready to share what it was like to be trapped in the pulpit and share about the Clergy Project. And I looked out over that crowd, knew I was finished with the church, knew I couldn't go back, and saw people just like you guys, people that are just like everybody else. Tall people, short people, thin people, in-between people, heavy people, black people, white people, Asian, Middle Eastern, people from religious backgrounds, people from non-religious backgrounds, young people, old people, somewhere in between people like me. And I was just overcome by the people. I was overcome by the thoughts of what I had been growing up when I went around with such a superior, judgmental attitude, trying to convert everybody to my way of thinking. And instead of sharing my story, all I could do was simply apologize for the life that I had lived all those years. Even as a Methodist pastor, even while I was struggling, I still felt like my way, up until I got to the religion piece of it, I felt that my way was the right way and that your way was wrong, that's a very haughty, superior attitude to have. And I was overcome with guilt, and I confessed my faults to all my fellow atheist and heathen brethren. And much to my surprise, everybody applauded. People cried. People jumped up, and they were shouting, and they were hooting and hollering, and it wasn't, "Get away, you evil heathen, you're a part of the enemy, you're trying to infiltrate our ranks." No, it was, "Oh, we welcome you, you found a home, we love you, we care for you." And that's been many months now, and I continue to have that response everywhere I go, every single place I speak. Friends on Facebook, which some of you are my friends on Facebook. Every day, just about, I have a message in my little inbox saying, "How you doing? Been thinking about you. Wondering how the move has been up to New Jersey. Wondering how you're settling into the cold weather. Have you had any good Italian food or gone to a deli?" Well, yeah, they're on every corner of the street in Cranford. And I'm not kidding. That's not one of those preacher exaggerations either. But you guys are from Jersey. You know all about that, don't you? This group that's standing here is a small group of the Clergy Project. These are my brothers and my sister. There are very few of us who are ladies. But they have been a support and continue to be a support for not only me, but for all the others who are part of the Clergy Project. So, what does my future look like? Well, it looks like New Jersey. New job, working as Public Relations Director at American Atheists. New city, of course, I live in Cranford. I shared that with you already. Right across the street from a nice Jewish deli. new friends, which includes all of you, and a new life. It's difficult to change, to experience that kind of paradigm shift, because it doesn't just involve moving from one way of thinking to another. In the same way that little caterpillar had to move into becoming a butterfly, I'm learning to fly. I don't know what flying is all about. I know what crawling around on the ground and eating leaves is like. But flying from flower to flower and enjoying the nectar that's within a flower, that's something new for me. And some days are great, like today. Today is awesome. Tomorrow, maybe I'll miss my old life. Those people that walked away from me and abandoned me, they were my friends, and I loved them. And you can't just turn off love, even if love has stabbed you in the back. So this is where I am, and I'm just being honest. If you've been where I've been and you've come out, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're sitting there, you're nodding your heads going, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. This paradigm shift is driven by agents of change. That's where we started. And I've shared with you the things that drove me, not baddie, although some people would say that, but drove me from a place of being entrenched in a religious tradition to moving through those steps that led me out and into a place of non-belief to where I am today, standing before you, sharing it any opportunity I get. Why? So that other people will see, hey, she's just an average person. You know, I can actually read about some of the good things that she did. How could she be an atheist? Well, maybe atheists aren't all so bad. Maybe humanists aren't this evil band that's trying to take over the world. Now, Dave Silverman will talk to you next week, and we'll see what he says. You can compare the two. I was just thinking about Dave is so funny. He's really a good guy to work for. Sorry about that. Off the subject completely. One of the things that my paradigm shift involved and continues to involve is being open and honest. There is no point in lying about who you are and what you are and where you are. And that's what I hope you have taken away from this talk, is that I want to be open with you about my journey, and I want to be honest with you about the things I did right, the things I did wrong, and the things I continue to do wrong. It's about reaching out to be the change. And I think it was Gandhi that said, be the change that you wish to see in the world. And I know that he was tied into a religious tradition, but, that's just good advice. That's something you can really hang your hat on. And as I said earlier, Red Bank Humanists, you do that. You see a problem and you go out and you attempt to fix it. You don't pray to some deity saying, oh, God, please, please help, please, please help, and leave it at that. As the old saying used to go in the Baptist church, just leave it in the altar. Leave it with God in the altar, and He'll solve it. No, I have to get up. I have to get off my derriere and go out there and solve it myself. We have to support each other. Life is tough. Life is beautiful at times. Life is disappointing. There are tragedies. There are all these different life situations that go on, and the way that we make it through is because we're there for each other. When we do those things, that's how we make shift happen. Thank you. I just got an amen. Take some questions. Okay, all right. So you guys have I saw your hand back in the back. He is a believer. He's still a believer. She asked about my husband and what his response was and how he feels. He hasn't been religious in quite some time. He was raised Catholic, and then I think really, honestly, he went to church with me because he's my husband. Now, he has faith, and he won't deny that. So we have this kind of little thing going on where if he wants to talk about things, I'll talk to him. If he doesn't bring it up, then I keep my mouth shut. I do that. Women keep silent in the church kind of thing. Except this time it's women keep silent in your house. Yes, sir.
I think I find interesting that I live in the Methodist pasture of New Jersey, Ocean Grove.
Yes, I've been down there. Yes.
You'd be interested to know that one of the few places that boarded up pre-storm was the camp meeting building.
Was it?
So the question of faith is
Yeah.
not as deep as it seems sometimes.
Yeah.
Nothing went up on my house boards.
No, me either. We stayed up there. Actually, talk about being open and honest. My son and I got prepared all our supplies, laid in water and food, and my husband's former military, so we had a big Rubbermaid that we had from Florida, full of MREs. Oh, almost worth praying that I wouldn't have to eat those nasty things, but we had everything laid in, and then at the last minute, he's like, "Oh, let's run over to the wine cellar and get a case of beer." So we were ready. Yeah, Sacramento wine. We didn't go anywhere with it. You'll have to help me, Eric, keep up with who's next, because I just get...
I'm going to use the mic as
Okay.
I
was going to ask you about your husband, but is your father still alive, and how does he feel?
No, my father is actually, he passed away about 2 months ago. So we did have the conversation. I did come out to him, and he was ill at the time. I didn't know it. Nobody knew it. He didn't tell anybody. He's old school. You don't show your weakness, you know. So when I talked to him, fully expecting to be disowned, excommunicated, you know, kicked out of the family, he didn't do that. You know, he was definitely very upset, and every time I talked to him after that, he wanted to pray with me. He wanted to preach to me, and once he went in the hospital and became very sick, I went up every other week. I lived 7 hours away and stayed with him, and it was tough because in the middle of the night when he's on the morphine and the painkillers, I mean, he just starts begging God to heal him and to save me. So it was not the most pleasant experience in my life, but you know, I know plenty who have lost their family totally, completely, and so I feel very lucky that I at least had that with my dad.
By the way, Ocean Grove got less damage than a lot of other towns, so Jesus did save them.
Despite their lack of faith, eh? Man, I wish I'd known that a long time ago. Hey, Tim.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. Two questions. One is, you know, as an organization, Red Bank Humanists, we debate from time to time, should we work with religious groups? For example, right here in Red Bank, there is Lunch Break, which has, which offers meals to homeless people and people without means, and they have a lot of, religious slogans, and they start their noonday meal with prayer. And so my question is, what's your opinion of humanist groups? How closely should we work with religious groups? Should we, for the sake of being helpful?
Right, for being, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's something that a lot of people question. And some people have the attitude of, no, stay away, don't go near it. I mean, almost like it's the plague that's going to rub off on you. I personally, for me, and I disagree with that. Now, do I think that I should be involved in, like, organizations I used to go to Nicaragua with, where, yes, we're going to come and we're going to fix your roof, but the expectation is that you let us do vacation Bible school and have worship services. So there's that big strings attached kind of mentality. But working with, it sounds like this homeless group, basically, they say a prayer and then they want to meet the needs of the people, right? I'd have no problem with that one. I actually think that would be a good way to start building some bridges between the faith groups and the humanist groups.
Well, that's great. That's a great lead-in to my second question.
Oh, good. I'm so glad I could work with that on this.
What do you think of your boss's billboards, which are often making fun of religion and so on?
I have to give the party line.
Well, you can give your secret answer and your public answer.
I'm an employee of American Atheists Incorporated, and I fully support everything that American Atheists produces. All right, move on. Next question. The open and honest part does not apply to that. Yes, who is next? I'm terrible at math. I loved your Whoever raises the microphone has the authority.
I have two questions. One is your children.
Yes.
How did they? Were you taking them along with you, or was it dropped like a bombshell? And how did they react?
Okay, good question. Well, of course, not of course, you may not have known this, but I didn't talk to anybody. I mean, I couldn't figure out how in the world I would start that conversation with any person, family, friend, or even colleague. You know, oh, I've called this appointment with you because, by the way, I no longer believe, but yet I'm a pastor. You know, just couldn't figure out in my mind how to make it happen. So I actually did talk to my sons in December over the Christmas holiday before I came out, before I resigned and then came out in March. My youngest son said, well, that's a relief, Mom, because I have no idea what I believe. I haven't had any for a long time. I just went to church with you because that's what I was supposed to do and enjoyed hanging out with my friends. So, okay, that's an easy one. My older son, who's 25, he's been away from home for a little while, and he's like, Mom, just do what you got to do. I don't believe at all. I'm an atheist. Wow. For Christmas this year, he's getting a scarlet letter tattooed on him somewhere. Like, I don't even have a tattoo. What about, I messed up with my kids. They can't even be honest with me. So, no, but they're good with it. And
the other question I have is reactions from people in your congregation. Were there any that were supportive, or they all put a curse on you?
No, there are two ladies out of my congregation who contacted me and talked to me. They actually took me to lunch a few times, and they had questions and they were curious, and they attempted to maintain a relationship. I mean, they really liked me, and I liked them, and we had a friendship, but it was just too weird, because eventually they stopped calling. They were never evil or harsh or hateful like some of the others, but once you take faith out of the religion out of the equation, when that's all that's the equation has been about, then you're not left with a lot in those friendships anyway.
Thank you for really an excellent talk. I think you're a very courageous person.
Well, thank you.
One word popped out of your presentation, and that was addiction. And it seems to me, all of a sudden in my head I'm running through, religion, the way it's practiced in America today, is an addiction. And there are pushers and there are users, and it is awfully hard to break that. And you've done it. My question is there, how can we help you and the Clergy Project? If we wish to give support or whatever, what could we do to help out your efforts?
If you would like to participate with the Clergy Project, which they're in the process of developing a transitional resource so that when someone comes out, it's not like when I came out and they're just kind of, you're out there, that's it, fly, be free. If you're old enough to have watched Mork and Mindy, you know what that means. So if you'd like to participate in that, FFRF has a section, I think it's their general donation section, and there's a drop down where you can designate your money, and there's one for the Clergy Project. So you can designate there. If you're not comfortable with that, you can always talk to me. I'm still on the board, and so I still participate regularly with what's going on, and I can assist you with that. And I think there's actually a donate link on clergyproject.org that has been put up. This is all really kind of new area. It's just something that's developed since I came out. In March, I came out March 26th in Bethesda. We had just under 100 members, and now we're up to 400. So this is really open up the floodgates and let them come in kind of situation.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your talk. I have two questions. As atheists, we don't proselytize.
Correct.
And is there anything like the Clergy Project for the average church-going person?
Yeah, there is a group that's called Recovering from Religion, my good friend Jerry DeWitt, who's Clergy Project member, ex-clergy, and now Clergy Project member, is the director. It is recoveringfromreligion.org, and they're a growing group, and they do exactly that, just for non-clergy, for your average, everyday layperson. They can go on there and find all the resources, helps. They even have groups that are, there may not be one locally, but they have online groups in different areas. So.
And the second thing, since you're quote-unquote coming out, have your views changed at all on secular social issues such as abortion or birth control?
Since coming out, no, but they were changing before I came out. As I moved through the stages of those change stages and moved from being extremely strictly fundamentalist to a little less fundamentalist to non-denominational, a little bit more liberal, and then ultimately into a more liberal Methodist church, my social justice thoughts and feelings and political standpoints changed as well. Oh, yeah, because they didn't know it. I couldn't tell them. I mean, all these secrets I had to keep. I can remember being in seminary, and they'll teach us certain things or talk about certain topics, and those being one, and saying, okay, now, depending on where you are, the first thing you need to do is determine what type of congregation you're going to, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, pro-choice, pro-life, and whatever it is that they believe, you believe. I should have got a clue then. I mean, really, it took me a long time.
I guess I'm next in line here.
There you are. Yes, sir.
You said something that caught my ear, that you have like 400 established members and an additional 100 applications that have to be vetted.
Yes.
Are you concerned that you might be trying to be infiltrated?
Yes, definitely.
How do you spot the real thing?
Well, not by prayer. No, what happens is they fill out an application online, and it comes through an initial group of people that I'm not a part of. And they look it over, and they kind of get a feel for the applications. The gentlemen that are a part of that have been out for a long time, and they're psychologists now. So they're definitely much smarter than I am. Once they make it through that initial phase, it's kind of like going in the Army. I mean, really, you got all these phases. Then they're sent down to different screeners, and I'm one of the screeners. There are two of us that screen people that come out of the Methodist Church because we talk the language, we know. And so we talk to them generally about twice, and most of us, because we were former clergy, can spot BS a mile off usually. So we've had some that we've turned away and said no, just because of questions. And if there is one that pops up that has red flags, then we send it back up to the entire group and say, hey, can you look all this over? This is our conversation. I have a funny feeling. Can you help me? So we try to do the best we can because, yes, there are plenty out there who would love nothing more than to find an active pastor who's a part of the Clergy Project trying, like I was, to get out and to just plaster the front page with it and out them, which would be absolutely devastating. So far, we haven't had any successful infiltrators. Cross fingers. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to follow the microphone. I apologize. Yes.
As a northerner, I'm wondering whether your connections with the South, with the Bible Belt, whether you're seeing a change, a generational change from people who are, dyed in the wool to people that are more free thinking.
As far as in.
It's the red state, blue state thing,
as far as being New Jersey.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, definitely. New Jersey.
No, I don't mean New Jersey. I mean like Alabama or the South. Is it changing? Do we have some hope that...
No. I don't think so. Not yet. I gotcha. No, I shiver when I walk back. Now, if you go to South Florida, I mean, there's yeah, that is South New York. Yes, sir.
All right. I've read reports that like the rise of the nuns, like now every 1 in 5 Americans is non-religious, 1 in 3 if you're below 30. Do you think that like one day there would be like a non-religious, well, I don't want to say majority, I would say like around like 30% of Americans, or
possibly. I mean, the trends seem to be indicating that, especially, how old are you?
18, 19.
Oh, okay, so you're the same age group, generation of my sons, and they definitely have come up with a totally different thought process and understanding of the world than I did. And I think that's pervasive across the country, and I think as these groups continue to move forward, that it's going to just encourage more and more and more. You know, one of the statistics that was a part of that report showed a lot of folks who are between 35 and 45 who are making this transition, which I fit right in there, just barely, but I fit right in there. So, yeah, I think it's going to increase. I don't think it'll be a majority. I don't think we should have an absolute majority of anything. We're America. America was founded, people that came to Ellis Island were every kind of people. And how did we become this country where you have to be one single kind of person? I disagree with that 100%. I think everybody should have equal rights. So there's my political stump speech. I've done the preacher's speech. Now I've done the stump speech. I appreciate your votes. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on some of the things you said about the difficulty, in fact, the horror of religion for women when you really look at it.
Yeah.
And it always amazes me as a feminist that so many women are able to stay. I was wondering what percentage of the Clergy Project are women, and are you doing anything special to help women who have, I think, a really difficult time in religious communities come out?
With just the exception of the Clergy Project, no, because one of our founding principles, and it's extremely important that we hold to that, is that we don't advertise or proselytize in any way, because then we could be. I mean, you get a bunch of preachers that have permission to proselytize again, and it's not a good situation. As far as the percentage of women, it's very small. There are a couple of retired nuns and a few of us pastors. For the longest time, I was the only active female pastor, and I'm the only female that has come out now. There are very few who are still in there. Mostly, it just reflects a religious community that women are definitely oppressed greatly.
I'll take one more question, and then we should
one more.
Pack it up, I think.
St. Nick.
St. Teresa, Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa, St. Nick. We've become fast friends already. He's going to give me presents. That's why I like him.
Well, my love.
Yeah. All right, that was funnier in my head. Sorry, guys.
This has to do with nostalgia and emotional attachment for the past. I note that you have your Gideons. I assume that's the one you received as a little girl. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm asking basically, I know nostalgia is compatible with your journey, but is there some sort of grief involved in this process?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I tried to ignore that for a bit. And had to eventually just come to the conclusion, because I was just going to work, doing my job, again, being open and honest, going to work, doing my job, coming home and watching TV, which is definitely not me. If you knew me, then you would know that's not me. And so one of the parts of the Clergy Project is there are secular therapists who are volunteering their time. So I did the unthinkable, and I called one. Whoa, big, big thing for me. Pastors don't share their problems. So I talked to this person, and that's exactly what she shared with me. She's like, Teresa, you're not grieving. You love those people, and you lost them all in one fell swoop. You lost all of them. Your life, everything you knew, every way, everything that I knew about how to live a life is gone. So, yeah, of course, I look back and go, where do you find that kind of society? Where do you find those kinds of friendships? How do you rebuild your life? when you don't know how. When all you know is you move to a new town and you find a new church and there's your friends and there's your social structure. And, it's just, and I'm sure that many of you have gone through the same thing, that I'm not unique in that. But, nostalgia, grief, loss, all of those. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for coming here and giving us a great insight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
A great journey we're sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.